need to destroy. When it comes to the inspector, if the inspector finds prohibited noxious weeds that have not been destroyed, the inspector shall give an inspector's notice. So right there, you see that there's some gray area. So when you see a noxious weed, the inspector walks in, he may give a notice. So when do they give a notice? Well, again, this is enabling legislation, which gives the opportunity for the municipalities to implement programs as well as services, and that would dictate what their vision is. Every municipality is different, and they're a product of an area, because on that part, you got nature and nurture aspects of that municipality. So when you're talking about nature, you're talking about local natural features, geography, geology, hydrography, and climate. About nurture, now that's a little bit more complex because the effects are interconnected, accumulative, shifting, because they have different demographics, different economics. Technology might be a little bit different, politics and culture. And some would argue that, well, it can't be that different. One of the examples I like to use is that if you go over to Dunvegan Bridge, which is in the Peace region, on the south slope that is facing north, you'll see coniferous trees. You cross the river on the northern slope, faces south, you'll see cacti. So within half a mile, you go from cacti to coniferous forest. So those two different things need to be addressed differently. And when we're talking about nurture, the best example I have is that since I have a French background, we'll just use French. I've seen two French communities, and you'd think they'd be similar, but the dynamics and the culture within one is different than the other. You have one that's quite advanced, proactive, while the other ones are a little bit more reactive and maybe a little behind times. And that's okay, because that's their culture. The inspection protocols around the province varies because, like I said, the culture of that municipality will dictate if they are methodical, ambitious, thorough, formal, consistent, and proactive. Other municipalities, though, are a little bit more individualized, sustaining, perceptible, informal, flexible, reactive, and complainant. Sorry, not complacent, complaint-based. So the danger of having a complaint-based and reactive program is you could find yourself in a Hatfield and McCoy situation where someone is using your program to actually attack a neighbor because they don't get along. And this is something you want to avoid. So what could be done and what was done? Well, we tried to increase and maintain communication. We tried to diversify the tools. We diversified the resources. We looked into alternatives. We EDRR. So EDRR stands for Early Detection Rapid Response. We use an integrated prevention plan. We encourage vegetation management. So here are some of the successes that we had. So we have increased discussions between parties involved. So that would be, the landowner, the municipality, and the inspectors, and the province, and industry. We started playing hockey instead of tennis. Now, for those who don't understand this, is talking or referring to tennis, it's like, well, the ball's in your court, you do something. And they bounce it back and say, well, I don't have the time, and then bounce it back, and then it goes back and forth. What we tried to do is a collaborative and cooperative method. So it's not talking to each other, but with each other. So this ball's in your court. to this. Okay, now it's us against the invasive species. So what are we going to do? It's not a municipal responsibility. It's not a landowner's responsibility. It's every Albertan's responsibility. So let's work together. So the message of the I.N.S.P.E.C.T program. Agricultural service boards and municipalities provide services, some of which are required by the province, right? That's the piece of legislation. Try to promote the program to get people to understand how we do inspections. Trying to establish fair treatment so everyone is treated the same way. We started to establish clear expectations. So I.N.S.P.E.C.T stands for the inspector's next step per established communication table. And that's the one thing that when we're talking about inspections, it's not punitive. When we're talking about inspection report, it's still not punitive. A plant does not decide to establish on a poor steward's land or a great steward's land. They're just a plant. They have no concept of geopolitical boundaries. They just do. To do that, we need to raise awareness. If a program services starts sharing information, you should see an increased cooperation instead of enforcement. And I have to stress this even more, is that people fear what they don't know and they don't understand, as well as they don't understand the message. So it's going to take some time when an inspector and a resident, or an inspector and a producer, and an inspector industry starts discussing, you're going to have these hurdles. Raising awareness, you'll explain who is involved, what is being done, why programs are provided, how programs are delivered, explain the measures. Some people say, well, that's quite clear. You should just do. It's not really clear. Again, we'll take the example of the noxious weeds. So here's a little illustration. Why did you pull me over? You're going too fast. Well, there's no speed limit, and I have no speedometer. So how do I know it's too fast? A question, especially when you're issuing a notice. To establish that speed limit sign, you need to establish expectations, limitations, and consequences. So where does this all start? Started with Northern Sunrise County, way back when. They defined you're going to send correspondence when you see a small patch or a big patch. And the question should come to your mind right away of saying, well, what's a small patch? What's a big patch? And what communication? Is that a letter? Is that a telephone call? Is that a notice? Now, what you see on your screen right now is where we found the original municipality that created a matrix. The Yellowhead County had a matrix, and they shared their experience. They sent correspondence. Even if it was an information letter, people reacted negatively because they thought it was a notice. A lot of notices are issued. So when they get an information letter, they don't know the difference between both letters. People get mad because they think that we're wasting time and money because we use satellite imaging to help us dictate the size of the infestation. But once we were consistent with our messaging, once we managed to send out the information, get some workshops done so we can share some experiences, people started to understand what the purpose was. Now, the door knocker is another information avenue that we used, which was definitely informal. And we'll talk to that a little later on. Now, again, this is a schematic of how our communication flow chart was established. If you had low points, you would get a door hanger, which just said, we stopped by, we visited, we were around. If you have any questions, here's our phone number. Once the point system went a little higher, then it was a little bit more formal. You saw a letter being sent, letter as much as an information package. So you had a flyer, an inspection report, fact sheets, authorization forms, and weed management forms. Now, these authorization forms and weed management forms were a service that the municipality at that point in time wanted to provide. Some people don't have the time or the expertise to actually purchase the proper herbicide or to apply the proper herbicide. The municipality decided that with the savings that they saw over the last couple of years, that they would actually provide that service for free. So for a small infestation, up to an acre or two, the product as well as the manpower was provided for free. But to do that, you need to actually release the municipality from liability. So what this did is standardize the consistency of the delivery and the inspection reports. It stabilized the priority, and it set in order the clarity for the ratepayers and the inspectors. So this is 3 of the 6 S programs that we were trying to implement at the municipal level to improve performance and improve our communications. After multiple versions, this was one of the latest ones that we implemented. So the sheet, it was also distributed through the newsletter, as well as through webinars and workshops. So even a resident or a producer could actually take the sheet, go see an infestation that they would have, and they would know what the inspector's results would be. What does that do? Well, it actually gives you the ability to target a little bit more precisely, especially if you're low in money, low in time, and low in resources. So you can attack the big fires and the small fires. Because big fires, you know that you'll probably end up with an inspector's notice. So you might as well get on top of the more important infestations. So in the inspect program, you'll see that the inspectors would go and measure the infestation area. They would monitor and collect the data to get an average plant per square meter. They would locate that infestation to see if it's in the center of the property, on a boundary of the property, or near a sensitive area. We'll also look at the historical activity of the case file. Is this a location where good stewardship is practiced? Are they always on top of things? Or are they only reactive? Or are they just plain dismissive? The weed infestation would actually dictate how many points you would get if the patch historically is decreasing or increasing. Is it new? Or is it staying the same? Weed species, this is where a municipality could, if they wanted to, give a handicap for something that is so pervasive that taking it aggressively would just not be conducive to a great relationship. So Canada thistle was an example, and Perino sow thistle is one of them that we used up north. Even though that these were pervasive, the fact that we had a very clear message and consistent way of delivering it increased the collaborations between ratepayers, the industry, and the municipality to where it is definitely under control. It is probably one of the cleanest counties that I visited through my years. Top of that, the last thing is, what was the last communication? Was it a door knocker, verbal? Was it an information package? Was it a compliance letter, or was it a notice? So you would tabulate all the numbers and then go down to your communication table. Is it 1 to 4? Then you'd get a door hanger, or you talk personally to the person or the landowner. You could get an information package once it elevated past a certain amount, where you would get a flyer, inspection report, fact sheets, and some release forms. If it went above that, then you would get a compliance letter, an inspection report, again, fact sheets, weak managements, and authorized release forms. If you were above the 15 point, you'd get a notice, an inspection report, fact sheets, and again, management's agreement. Now, when you look at the totals, you can actually adjust them. Now, some of these numbers, where's my little, oh, there's, back 1 second. There we go. Let's do the laser. So when you look at these numbers here that are in red, these are numbers that changed, meaning that this is not set in stone. Once your agricultural service board or municipality starts implementing a program similar to this, what happens is that they can actually monitor how many inspections were done, how many notices were issued, and what kind of species were targeted. If in the event it was too aggressive or not aggressive enough, you can actually change these numbers, giving this an ability to adapt to local pressures. On Northern Sunrise County back in the day, they provided everyone with the matrix, as well as a step-by-step of how to evaluate an infestation. It went through the list, the size of the infestation, the severity of the infestation, the location, the historical activity, the historical size, and the weed species. And we touched this just before, so it's a repetition, and I apologize for that. But the thing is that when you're communicating with residents, producers, and industry, it's going to be a lot of repetition, a lot of the same thing over and over again. On the back of that sheet, there was also a scale to tell you exactly what the infestation size was. 0 to 0.6, 0.6 to 2.5, 2.5 to 10, 10 to 40, and 40 to 160. This is what it looks like. So if you have 160 acres, that's a major infestation. Of 10 to 40, you're looking at 25% of that total infestation. What we wanted to get away from is that, well, it's a small patch. It's a big patch. Now, the ability of the inspectors to calculate was based on the computer program that they were using, and they would actually tabulate all the areas that were infested into 1 acre plot. So you might have several 0.1 acre infestations, which would accumulate to, let's say, maybe 10 acres. That is the only difference between an inspector and the residents. Unless they actually went around and measured every patch, that is the only thing that would vary between an inspector and a resident or a producer or industry. Again, when we're looking at the matrix, when we're looking at all these tables, they're all color coded because it gives you a visual impression about how severe this situation was. And again, when you're looking at these numbers, they're not set in stone. Adapted. For some areas that are starting, you might want to increase these numbers. Instead of saying 3 per square meters, you might want to say 9. Again, when we're going through the numbers, you can see that once you add a low number, this is an example of a door knocker that was left at the door, was very informal. And the one thing that we learned is that when we're sending an information package, or even a door knocker, you don't write names and you put a lot of pictures because it's less abrasive to residents and industry. It was amazing to realize we started putting the door knockers down. We had a lot of people that did not know that we were entering the property to do a weed inspection. They had no idea about the Weed Control Act. They had no idea that the municipality had weed inspectors, and therefore they were shocked. Again, the purpose of having this communication table is to make sure that everyone is informed that these things are happening. And especially in a world where we are bombarded by communication, whether it's emails, texts, Instagrams, people are having problems trying to find useful information or to be kept up to date about what's going on locally when they have 10,000 emails or communications that are coming to their phones and to their emails, trying to sell them something or inform them something. So this is going to be a challenge. So there's different types of notices. This one is an inspector's notice. There's no verbiage. It's just strictly, here's the name, here's your address, this is the problem, here's the location, and this is what we are expecting you to do. The Control Act also gives you an opportunity to produce a local authorities notice. So the local authorities notice is when a subdivision is done, and you can actually just send out multiple notices to people without actually going step by step. The last one is a debt recovery notice and is the punitive one. This is where communication broke down, nothing was getting done, and the fees were now sent to the landowner. The back of every one of these, you should have explanations about what is going on, where is this coming from, such as what is a noxious weed, what is your responsibility, what are the requirements to deliver a notice. It seems like my slides are going forward by themselves. There we go. Now, the only notice that's missing in here is a minister's notice. That's where the minister actually gets involved. The reason why there's no form included in this presentation is there is no minister's form for a notice. I believe the last time a minister's notice was issued, it was over 13 years ago. So it's something that is rarely used. Now, what happened to that notice? It was issued to a gravel pit. And the municipality was having difficulty getting the industry to comply with the requirements. So can you make changes? Absolutely. You can improve, you can add, you can subtract. Can you go too far? So I'll share a little story with you. So I went to a restaurant and wasn't too sure exactly what to get. So the waiter comes in, he asks, "Can I get you something to drink?" I said, "Sure, I'll take a coffee and just cream." Okay. So he brings the coffee and the cream and didn't have a spoon. I said, "Sorry, sir, I don't have a spoon." Oh, he said, "No problem." So under his vest, he reaches into his shirt pocket and reaches out a spoon and gives it to me. I found it curious, but I let it go for a little bit. And then he left off and he came back to get my order. So again, my order. And I said, by curiosity, I'm sorry, sir, but why did you have a spoon in your shirt pocket? Third, well, the corporation is trying to implement changes to save money. So they got this consulting group to do some studies, and they found out that 75% of the time, when someone drops a utensil, it's a spoon. So now we're mandated to carry a spoon with us because traveling back and forth with the amount of servers that we have here, we saved a few hours of labor and walking just because we didn't have to walk to go get the spoon, and now we just have the spoon. Oh, by the way, sir, you have a string in your zipper. He says, yeah. Oh, I thought to myself, I said, I'm going to regret this, but you're not surprised? He said, no. It seemed like this consultant group found that anytime a male waiter would go to the washroom, um, they would have to spend a minute and a half washing their hands. And if they're going once an hour, so on and so forth, and the amount of waiters. So they would save about 2 hours a day, waiters washing their hands. And I said, well, I'm not getting the picture here. What does the string have to do with this? He says, well, when a male waiter would go to the restroom, he would actually unzip it and just pull the string out, not having to touch anything, and then could go to the restroom and relieve himself. Oh, interesting. Um, Sure, Chris. So you have the string to pull it out, but how do you put it back in? Said, well, the consultants didn't actually come up with a solution. And I don't know what the other waiters do, but I use the spoon. So when you're building something so prescriptive, all of this story is that you might end up with a solution that you did not want to see. So you're going to have a little bit of flexibility in your system and not go too excessively far because you might end up having a spoon used for other purposes. So the attempt is to always try to keep it simple. So how is the inspection supposed to be promoted? Biggest challenge is that you can't inspect every field before your weed control program is implemented. That happens. So you need to convey to residents that some years inspectors will be getting that information to them prior to their weed management strategy. Some years it's going to be distributed after. So what do? Well, if you receive it before, you have an opportunity to adjust your weed management plans. Once you receive it after, well, maybe it's an opportunity to see how effective that weed management strategy worked. So it's not a bad thing. It's a communication thing. Because if we don't know what we don't know, we can't deal with it. The purpose of this is to inform people. Again, we need to have people on board to understand what the expectations are, what the limitations are, and what the consequences are. This conversation needs to happen consistently, not only in the summer, but throughout the year. In reality, when we work together, we can accomplish more. So we're trying to work smarter, not harder. Now, is a notice final? Well, a we notice can be appealed, but there are restrictions. For the We Control Act, the requirement action timeline on the notice, or 10 days, whichever is less, is your window of opportunity to appeal. And why less? Well, because you could have a management strategy that it goes into the following year, and you could have some that are 3 days because of seat set. Once the municipal secretary or the CO receives the appeal, they have 5 days, not 5 business days. They have 5 days to hear the appeal or to put the appeal board together. Now, the appeal fee is $500. This isn't free. So who hears the appeal? Well, the We Control Act states that an appeal board is an independent committee appointed by the local authority. Members of the committee must not be composed of the people involved in the original decision. That means it should avoid having any councillors or agricultural service board members from that municipality to sit on that board. Does that mean that you can't have anyone who's a councillor or an agricultural service board member on that board? No, it just means that you need to avoid those who are living within that municipality. We're seeing more and more municipalities that what are doing is they're forming a joint appeal committee at large, some councillors, some agricultural service board members. And when an appeal is heard in one municipality, those councillors, agricultural service board members, or residents do not sit on that appeal. Because now you're trying to avoid, as much as possible, a Hatfield and McCoy situation. John doesn't like Mary, so they're going to be hearing the appeal, and then all of a sudden there's a less objective verdict. We're also noticing that for municipal committees, we're seeing less and less volunteers. So when you're having multiple municipalities working together, now you just have to supply 2 or 3 members on the board instead of having 5 or 7. There is no set numbers, but it should be an odd number. So what happens to the $500 fee that was applied? If the appellant is successful, they will have their $500 refunded. In the event they're partially successful, the appeal committee may decide to refund the $500. If they're not successful, they don't get the money back. So what if you don't agree with the fee? Because there's, again, multiple notices. You'll get your first notice for the enforcement. Once the enforcement is done, then you'll send an enforcement fee, which is still a notice. Appeal the fee as well. Again, same restriction. 10 days or less. You have to notice to issue your appeal. And again, the appeal board must convene within 5 days of reception of that appeal. Still an appeal fee of $500. So someone who is not happy with the inspection or the notice could appeal the notice. They might lose that appeal. The enforcement comes and they still have an opportunity to appeal the enforcement fee. Now, where could they find that information? Well, it's behind that notice. In the event you don't like the outcome of either, and you don't have to wait for one to go to this one, you could appeal to the Minister of Agriculture. But this one has an even tighter time. It dictates that once you have received decision of the appeal committee, you have 3 days, not 3 business days. You have 3 days to send your appeal to the minister. And they'll take that under consideration when they see the postmark on the envelope when you send the appeal to the minister via mail or when you're sending via email. They'll see the timestamp on that. So why bother with door knockers and information packages? Because we're trying to deal with early detection, rapid response. Well, here's a case of an isolated spotted knapweed infestation. Very inexpensive to eradicate. Now, this is a picture in Montana. Same spotted knapweed. It is estimated to control spotted knapweed in Montana, it'll cost billions of dollars to get the natural areas back into their natural state. So what do you do here? Well, if you have a conversation with, in this case, it was transportation, and you approach them and saying, on the side of the road there was some spotted knapweed, and we noticed it's around the post. Clean your auger between one post location to another. And in this case, they didn't. So just that communication and reaching out to them and asking some questions got them to implement a cleaning of the auger bit. Now, it didn't have to be steam cleaned. But if you remove 99.9% of the dirt on that auger, you just remove 99.9% of all the seeds that you find there. Very inexpensive way to reduce the spread of weeds. But this wouldn't have happened unless you engage in a conversation with, in this case, was Alberta Transportation. Here's a leafy spurge infestation, very small, easy to eradicate, or easier to eradicate. And at this point, it's a little bit too late. This neither. You can imagine the amount of frustration as a landowner to try to control this, especially if you never knew for the first little while what these plants were. So the purpose of the inspection program is to inform people what we have found and why is it important. Those fact sheets come in pretty handy. Because the fact sheets are provided by the Alberta Invasive Species Council, and they tell you how to control, whether it's mechanical, chemical, cultural, or biological. It gives a resident or producer options. You can imagine when you have an infestation of this size, of this magnitude, how much money this would cost and how many years of control it would actually require to get this under control. And one of the reasons why some of these species are on the list is because their seed viability ranges from a couple of years. And for example, common mullein is 100 years. Very important to engage in an early detection rapid response, especially when you have seed viability that could last up to 100 years. When you're looking at a prevention program, just like the I.N.S.P.E.C.T program, for every dollar that is spent, you'll probably save $100. Once something is established to a certain extent, local population with limited distribution, for every dollar you spend, you're going to save about $25. Gets to a point where it's a little bit wider, then your dollar doesn't go as far. Your return only comes to $5 to $10. Once it's widespread and damaging, for every dollar you spend, you might get $1 back. So you can see where once the education aspect of it comes in, you're going to get a very productive program. You're going to get a bigger bang for your buck. Remember, we're trying to put something that is perfect, cheap, and fast together, but it doesn't always work quite well. If you implement a program, usually you can get 1 out of 3. If you put a lot more effort, you might get 2 out of 3. So if you want cheap and fast, it won't be perfect. If you want it cheap and perfect, it won't be fast, but you get the drift. The problem is when you're trying to get everything together, you might end up in a situation like the waiter and the spoon, which is what you want to avoid. Your choice. Things under budget requires more preparation and increased communication. Why is this important? When it comes to the Weed Control Act, the Agricultural Pest Act, the Soil Conservation Act, these are frameworks. We know there's an obligation to deal with prohibited noxious weeds, but we don't know what are the specific obligations of a noxious weed at the municipal level unless it's very clearly defined and shared with residents. Comes to the Agricultural Pest Act, there's a duty of the local authority. A local authority of a municipality shall take active measures to prevent the establishment of or to control or destroy a pest in the municipality. I don't know if there's anything grayer than that one. Because if I would ask you, any one of you, what is an active measure? Some of you might come up with, well, it's an article. Well, it's an inspection. Well, it's an enforcement order. You'd all be right. This is an example of what happened when we implemented the I.N.S.P.E.C.T matrix and then we transferred it to a pest infestation. Now, again, producers were able to establish how bad the infestation was. It made it a little bit more consistent. It's going to be even more important to implement something similar when you're dealing with the Soil Conservation Act because it's even more fluid than the Pest Act. I went through this whole program quite rapidly, and I will open it up now to questions. And we can ask anything on the subject. And if is there anything else that someone would like to ask, but more privately, you have my credentials and my correspondence and my contact information on the screen, and you're more than welcome to reach out to me and we can engage in a conversation.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Sebastian, for this insightful presentation. I hope everybody found it valuable as I did. Now we will move on to the Q&A section. Sebastian will be answering your questions, and feel free to ask the questions in the Q&A section, and try to answer as many questions as we can. Are there any questions? Oh yeah, there is a question.
There you go.
Would you be willing to share your document? They are very well done.
Absolutely.
Uh, do you have an email or something you can show on your screen and everybody can take a screenshot of it?
Yeah, I can share my screen again and then we'll go from there.
Perfect. Yeah, so that everybody can take a screenshot and
Yeah,
if anybody have any other questions for Sebastian, they can always send me an email and I will try to like send him the email and try that he can answer your question. Perfect. Yeah, you can take his screenshot and maybe send him an email and he can send you the document.
so on another note, while people are looking at this, so I did visit multiple municipalities and help them establish something similar in their municipality, and it varied from some right down to the south, right to the north, and I'm still willing to assist an agricultural service board in implementing a policy or working on their policies regarding weed control, because every place is specific and it's got those requirements or their focuses that they want to deal with. So again, just reach out and we'll be able to assist.
Perfect. There's another question for you. Does this program usually require additional staff or alternative administrative burden? Alterate, elevate. For some reason, I'm having a hard time pronouncing that word.
Uh,
Yeah.
so it depends. Like a good politician, it's always depends, right? So what happens is that is your program proactive? Are you inspecting 10%, 50%? Are you reactive? And that will actually dictate how much resources you'll need. You might be reactive. Some municipalities don't have either the time, the talent, or the money to inspect every single property. And that's okay. Because again, every municipality has different economics, right? If you don't have the revenue of a very well-established municipality who has loads of industry to pay for these programs, you might not be able to have every site inspected. Could establish it as reactive and saying, we're just going to be on a complaint basis. One of the recommendations I have is that if you do go to a reactive and complaint based, that you implement that the quarter sections around the location that was a complaint would be inspected as well. So if you have a Hatfield and McCoy situation, you're going to inspect Hatfield and then you're going to inspect McCoy. That way, everyone gets treated the same way, and you're going to implement, let's say, a strategy to reduce the complaint base because they don't want to have the inspectors at their place either if they're trying to weaponize your program.
Perfect. We have another question. How would you go about problematic ratepayers with regards to doing their part?
Oh, I think we might have skipped one. Oh, you have a different one. Okay.
Yeah, there is one in the chat section too. Somebody sent
Okay.
another question in the chat, and there's
So,
another one after that on Q&A.
okay. So ask that question again, please.
How would you go about problematic ratepayers with regards to doing their part?
Uh, it depends on what the problem is. Are they dismissive about the authority of the Weed Control Act, or are they reluctant because they have no money? So every challenge will have a different response to it. So if they're dismissive, sometimes you will have to just have a show of force. If they're restrictive in either time, talent, or treasure, then you might collaborate a little bit more. We had some people where in the event they didn't have the time, they didn't, so you worked with them. The municipality that when we implemented this was very willing to assist as long as it's a small patch of less than an acre or an acre or so. We were able to start assisting in the purchase and the application of the herbicide or the mowing, because we still use mechanical and biologicals. In some cases, we release some pest agents to attack the Canada thistle.
Perfect. There's another question for you. Any advice for using this program with organic producers with large infestations over multiple quarters because herbicide options are limited and cultivating often leads to soil control act issue?
Yeah, I did a presentation for the organic producers. That would have been probably 2017. Um, they are still mandated by law to control noxious weed and to eradicate prohibited noxious weed. If an organic producer receives a notice, you have to give them all the options. If they do not comply with that notice, then you could use any one of those choices. For example, if one of the choices was to mow or to apply a certain herbicide, you could do either or. It is not the responsibility of the province, nor the responsibility of the municipality to make sure that your organic license stays in place because you didn't want to control the weeds. And I know it's not a very well received message, but if you choose to do organic production because you can get a better revenue, you're going to have to spend a little bit more time and effort and manpower to control these things. Because once they're out of control, it is going to be disastrous for the organic producer because nothing will be able to grow eventually.
Perfect. We have another question for you. What is your view on targeted regions, townships, priority weed area control programs for weed control for municipalities with constrained resources?
Again, the enabling piece of legislation gives the municipality the opportunity to target townships or specific weeds or specific things. But you need to be very clear and you need to establish a very good timeline about this is our target area or this is our target species. This is where we're trying to aim for. The inspect program and the inspection all in its own is one thing and one thing only, a communication tool. So you need to communicate it quite effectively in saying, this is our intent. Once people understand the intent, they might not like it, but if they understand it, they can abide by it by consensus, meaning that they're not going to be overly opposed to it. They just understand that this needs to get done. But the communication strategy is going to be a pillar of that program.
Perfect. Think so that should be all for the questions. I don't see any more questions. Yeah. Yeah, and you did share your email and
Phone
like
number,
if
yeah.
yeah, phone number. If anybody has any other questions, anybody can feel free to send you an email or call you, whatever you're comfortable with. Yeah. So thank you so much, Sebastian, for answering those questions. It was an exciting presentation. It was a pleasure to have you with us today. This concludes our webinar. Thank you all for attending, and we hope everybody found this webinar informative and enjoyable. Have a great day, guys. Yeah.